Hey guys, I want to make a quick video about my recent missions trip to Haiti. For those of you who haven't heard yet, the plan was to be in Haiti for 13 days, but we ended up only being there for 3 days of actually doing our missions trip. And then we spent 2 days being evacuated out of the country. So I wanted to share the story of what happened and how we were encouraged by what happened actually. So in the first few days that we were there, we were actually able to accomplish a lot, from doing a cultural immersion experience where we just had money and a shopping list and had to go into the city and figure out how to communicate with people even though we didn't know the language and try to buy different items. The second day we worked at the Hope Star orphanage that was a part of the Rock Church down there and got to play with the kids and hear the story about how it all started. And then in the afternoon we worked with some people in a shelter who had all their houses destroyed from the hurricane in October. And we were able to fellowship with them, show a movie, spend time with the kids, play games, and feed them. And then this third day we're there, we put on 2 roofs on houses and then did a big kids event where we did skits, played soccer, balloons. We fed them as well. But there were probably 300 to 400 kids that showed up, so we actually ran out of food, unfortunately. But on the start of the 4th day, we found out that there were actually riots and demonstrations in the city because one of he was a Haitian rebel who was on the DEA's wanted list for drug trafficking, and he was about to be elected into the Senate, which he thought would give him immunity from the law, but the DEA was able to arrest him before that. So he was from the area of Haiti where we were working, called Jeremie. And so there was riots and they were burning tires in the streets and things like that. So we found out about that in the morning. So we changed our plans. Instead of going into town to build roofs, we decided to go back up to the orphanage, which was on the hill where our hotel was, so we wouldn't go into the main city area. But that pushed us back about 30 minutes. And as we were leaving the hotel, we were stopped by a UN police officer about 50 feet out of the gate, who told us that we shouldn't be on the streets because of what was going on. So we ended up staying at the hotel, and we were able to get the phone number of the police officer. So we decided to just stay in and make cards with verses that we could share with people in the hospital or prison that we planned to visit later that day. And in the middle of that, the Haitian employees who worked at the hotel ran out screaming for us to run hide in our rooms. And we saw how scared the local Haitian people were, so we figured this is probably a pretty big deal. And we ran up to our rooms, locked the doors, and hid any trace that we were there. So, and then I was able to look out the window and see there was a mob down at the gate that was looking for Americans because they were mad about what happened to Guy Philippe, the guy who was arrested. So basically, we stayed in there for a few hours, and we found out later that 2 of the founders of the Hope Star orphanage were the missionaries who were there, that the mob had broken into the orphanage and threatened them with machetes and robbed them, but didn't harm them, and then left. So if we had gone to the orphanage like planned, it would have been a whole different story from what we experienced. But we ended up calling the UN to get evacuated, and our leadership team decided that instead of staying and waiting it out, that we would evacuate. So we just grabbed our essentials and the clothes that were on our back and some valuables we had, and UN convoy came rather quickly and evacuated us to the police station, where they checked our passports and identities and then brought us to the UN to spend the night before we planned to fly out the next morning. And at the UN station, we met about 37 Ukrainian and Russian missionaries who were also being evacuated. So we got to fellowship with them during our time there. And because we didn't have anything, they actually provided us with air mattresses, blankets, pillows. And not everyone got an air mattress, but we all had something to sleep with because we were in a newer building that had wood floors and air conditioning because all the old buildings had been destroyed by the hurricane. But there was no furniture in it, so we were basically going to just sleep on the floor in our clothes, and that's all we had. and we didn't have much food either, so we just kind of snacked on what we had that evening. And then the next day we were able to all get flights out and go to Port-au-Prince, which was the capital city. And the flights from Jeremie to Port-au-Prince are these little 5 to 9 passenger planes, so they were kind of fun, but we luckily were able to charter some of those the next day and get out of there. And then we spent about a day in Port-au-Prince at a fancy hotel, which was a blessing, and then fly back to Miami and then back to San Diego the next day. And luckily we were able to reschedule those flights with American Airlines. And I just wanted to share a few verses with you guys from Romans 8. I won't read them all to you, but I want to point some things out from verse 28 to 39. This was a Devo shared with us by one of the pastors who was on our trip, who was also part of starting that orphanage. He was one of the guys that was threatened with the machetes. But if you look in verse 28, it says, "And we know, for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose." So it's something that we know, and whether it was our extreme situation or some situation you might be going through in your personal life or relationships that doesn't seem very positive, this says that we know that God will work it together for good for those who love God. And it's all things, not just some of the things. So even in that situation, our challenge was to figure out how's God working that for good. Us being threatened, held hostage in our hotel, evacuated, leaving early. How is that a good thing? So if you read on, it kind of helps with that as well. In verse 29, it talks about us being conformed into the image of his Son, so being conformed to the image of Jesus. And what's interesting, if you look at the Bible with Jesus and ask yourself how many times Jesus was accosted by a mob, it actually happens several times in the New Testament. And what's interesting is it talks about how he just slipped right through it. And that's literally what happened for us. We kind of snuck straight through a mob of 200 to 250 people with machetes who were trying to kill the foreigners. And we escaped out of the country. So we were able to experience that and sort of live through something that Jesus experienced. And then if you look at verse 21, this was the challenge that our pastor brought to us. It says, "When they say these things, or then, what then shall we say to these things?" And this was if we come to America and people ask, well, why did that all happen? And the second half of the verse says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" And that's what we were shown throughout the whole experience, is that God was with us every step of the way. And the whole thing was a demonstration of his protection and love for us, because obviously there was a bad thing that happened. There was a mob looking for foreigners, but God didn't cause that. We're in a sinful world, and that was a part of the circumstances that we put ourselves in. But what God did, and I'll explain all the little things he did that saved us out of that. But what I wanted to point out really quick is in verse 32 it says, "He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" So basically it talks about how God gave us his only Son, and how that's the biggest gift he could ever give. So he already proved to us that he's willing to go to any length to give us, or he's willing to spare no expense because of how much he loves us, because he already gave the greatest expense, which is his Son. So with our experience, every little step of the way, he spared nothing. So everything from letting us know that there were riots, so we didn't go to where we planned, to being stopped by the UN police officer at the exact moment we left the building and we didn't go to the orphanage. We got his phone number. We had the Haitian hotel workers who saved our lives and lied to the mob and said there were no Americans there, when they very well could have let the mob right in. We had supernatural peace. So while we were in the rooms, you can imagine it could have been a very traumatic and fear-filled situation, but most of our team was in a lot of peace, and a lot of people just continued talking and spending time with each other, and some of us took naps We're able to fall asleep because we weren't in that situation of fear. And that's the peace that transcends understanding, because based on understanding, we shouldn't have been at peace in that moment. Then God gave us a quick evacuation. Normally getting a UN convoy would have taken hours, but because they were already evacuating those Ukrainian Russian missionaries, we just kind of tagged along on that whole experience. We were held up at the UN facility, which was new, and had nice air-conditioned rooms with no mosquitoes or anything like that. The Ukrainians shared their beds and blankets and pillows with us, and we also got to fellowship with them and connect with them and hear their stories. We even got toothbrushes, and in the morning we even got coffee. All these little things that weren't essential, but God gave them to us and allowed us to have the little things. We were all able to get safe flights out of there the next day. We were able to use the extra money we had from our trip being cut short to be able to stay in a hotel. And because we got insurance on our flights, we got to work with American Airlines and reschedule our flights so we could fly to America safely the following day. So all those things were all demonstrations of God's provision and protection for us. And what's interesting too is if you go on to verse 35, it says, "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword?" And we were actually able to experience most all of those things in our 2 days, from being persecuted, going through tribulation, being in distress, the famine of only having this food that were in our backpacks, the nakedness of only having the clothes on our back, the danger and sword of being threatened by this mob with machetes. And the last thing I want to finish up with is just verse 37 through 39 says, "No, in all things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ our Lord." And I just wanted to share that with you guys, because the temptation for us is to question why did this happen? Why couldn't this have happened a few weeks later? We were only there for 2 weeks. It didn't have to happen in the middle of our trip. Why were we only there 3 days? We had all this money we raised, all this planning, all this time and energy that go into serving the people of Haiti, and it was all cut short. Why did that all happen? And those would be questions that you're tempted to ask, but what we have been shown to look at it from based on these verses, we can see, well, how did God work this for good? And he really spoke to everyone on our team and showed us a powerful testimony of his love and his provision through every little step of what we went through. And although it's unfortunate that we didn't get to finish the work that we did, we all really want to go back and finish what we did. And all of our stuff is left in Haiti. We had to go get more clothes, but we can replace that stuff. But our safety is something that couldn't have been replaced, and God protected us from anything that could happen. So I just want to encourage you guys that whatever you guys are going through, whether it be something that you feel might be small or something that might be great, God can work it together for good. And I'd encourage you to have that perspective of how is he working this. Not necessarily good as in rainbows, butterflies, good, everything's nice and easy, but according to the scripture, it talks about being conformed to the image of Christ and that being good. And how's God using your circumstance to grow your character and make you a better person, make you more Christ-like. But yeah, thanks for watching, and talk to you soon. Bye.